Shabbat Shalom, Hampstead Garden Suburb Synagogue. Welcome to the sermon for Parshat Yitro, entitled How to Survive Homeschooling, Lessons from Yitro and Amazon. This week, we learned that Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos has announced that he will be stepping down as CEO of the company. Now why? It seems that he's at peak performance, making so much money, becoming richest man in the world during COVID, producing such amazing products for everyone from one moment to the next. Why would he walk away? Let's talk about Amazon's model. Jeff Bezos said a number of years ago that he applied the principles of Jim Collins from Good to Great, particularly the flywheel effect. What's a flywheel? It's a massive, heavy wheel that's made of steel that it takes so much effort to push forward, and you're struggling to push, but the more effort you make, the greater the effort, the beginning of the spin that starts to happen, until by kinetic force, internally, the wheel starts to spin on its own. What's Amazon's particular secret of the flywheel? Well, their flywheel begins with the customer experience. They said, we want our customers to be completely satisfied, so satisfied indeed that they will spread the word to others. What will then happen is that more people means more traffic, which leads to more sellers. The more sellers leads to greater selection and then greater customer experience. Now, the more that wheel starts turning, that leads to lower costs, which leads to lower prices, which again leads to greater customer experience. So now that wheel is turning with almost no effort on the part of the company itself. Why would he walk away from something that is working so well? In this week's parasha of Yitro, the namesake of the parasha, Yitro, Moses' father-in-law, comes to the nation of Israel, and there is Moses judging the people, explaining the law to them. And he is there from morning to night, and he's wearing himself out. And his father-in-law looks at him and says, "What are you doing? What are you doing? You are going to completely exhaust yourself before you've gotten anywhere near the promised land. Here's what you need to do. You need to appoint people, a system that is going to work for people to interpret the law. You need a system of thousands, hundreds, 50s, tens, all sorts of judges on various levels of court system that if people have issues, queries, they can go to the lower courts. If the lower courts can't help them, they can go to the mid-range courts, the upper courts, until if they can't figure it out, they will come to you." Moses says, that makes a lot of sense. Yitro says, if you do this, al mekomo yavo v'shalom, you'll get there in a state of peace. He will get there in a state of peace. You won't be worn out. Sure enough, the verse continues. Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything he said. He chose men of accomplishment from the heads of the people, leaders of thousands, leaders of hundreds, leaders of 50s, leaders of tens. Moses sent off his father-in-law and he went to his land. I want to ask a number of questions. But before I do, let me share with you a difference of opinion in viewpoint of the Talmud and the Tosfos. According to the Talmud, there ended up being 78,600 judges. How do you get there? Well, first of all, there are judges of thousands. Now, if you've got 600,000 Jews, that means you need 600 judges. One judge for every 1,000. That's how the Talmud interprets it. Then you have judges over 100. In other words, 6,000 of those. Then you have judges over 50, 1,200 of those. Then you have judges over 10, which 60,000, adds up to 78,600. The Tosfos says, well, that doesn't really add because if you've taken the first judges, you're missing a number, so it was probably a bottom-up system where first over every 10 people there was a judge appointed. Then from those judges, they appointed the next level and the next level and the next level all the way up to Moses. But I want to suggest for you a third way, perhaps. And this third way is based on the following questions. Number one, what does Yitro mean when he says, when this is all sorted, al mekumo yavo v'shalom, that he can come to his place in peace? Number two, so Yitro gives Moses a system, judges of thousands, judges of hundreds, judges of tens, fifties, tens. And then the Torah says, and Moses did what Yitro said, he made judges of thousands. Why do we need all the repetition? Just let it say, Moses did exactly as Yitro had suggested. Number three, Yitro says that Moses should appoint judges, yishpatuhain, they will judge. But when the Torah tells us what happened, it says yishputuhain. It's almost a passive form. They had their judgments done. And in fact, the commentators say that once Moses explained the laws, many of the laws just fell into place on their own. And then finally, at the end of the paragraph, when it says, and Yitro went home, well, what do you mean Yitro went home? Jump ahead to the book of Numbers, and there's a conversation between Moses and Jethro. Jethro says, I'd like to go home. Moses says, you can't go home. You are the eyes of the people in the wilderness. So does Jethro go home now, or does he go home then? Or does he come back? What's happening here? I want to suggest, friends, that what we find is not an instantaneous system the way Jethro has described it. Jethro has said we need judges over thousands, hundreds, fifties, tens, but that takes time. Perhaps what happened was that Moses first established a number of judges. Was it 600 over 1,000 each? Perhaps. Or maybe the Torah even means judges over thousands. In other words, you could have had 100 each over 6,000. Moses sets up a system of helpers that can explain the law. Now, once those people understand the law, they can then convey their teachings to a next lot of disciples. Now, remember even what Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch in 19th century Germany says, don't think of it as judges. Remember, judge and rabbi and teacher are synonymous in our tradition. These are people who were explaining the minutiae of the law to the people. So when we think of it ending up as a class of 10, well, you wouldn't have a judge over 10 people, but you might have a Torah teacher over 10 people. But that doesn't happen instantaneously. That's not simply an appointment. That's something that comes with time as you learn the intricacies of the law through your teacher who has learned from his or her teacher along the way. Sound familiar? It's almost like the flywheel push. In the beginning, Moses is struggling, so he is told, make a system with a few judges. Start pushing just a little and a little bit more and applying that pressure. It's very hard in the beginning, but eventually that system begins to take off by itself and gathers momentum until that flywheel is moving faster and faster and faster until every group of Jews has its own Torah teacher. Until Yushputu. The judgment's happening on its own. It's a passive. It's not Moshe or anybody else making an effort. Moses has made the judgments, and the judgments now happen on their own passive tense. That's what Yitro's saying. Yitro's saying, you want shalom, peace, it will fall into place, but you need to have the systems in place to make it happen. And so the Torah describes, after Yitro has told him how this will work, Moses starts to implement the system. He starts with the judges over thousands. Doesn't happen immediately that he gets to the hundreds, but over time, then the hundreds, then the 50s, then the tens. Remember, the Torah doesn't work in chronological order. And so this may have been over a period of months until we get to the end of the story where Yitro says, my work is done. That wheel is spinning the way I described it. Now I can go home. That's when he turns to Moses in the book of Numbers and says, I'm done. My work is done. We find that here in our story, just so the story can end, and just so that we can give some closure to Yitro's description, where he said, this will end up peacefully. So it happened, and then he said, I'm going home. But when does it actually happen chronologically? Not till much later. Bezos' plan was always to walk away once that flywheel was spinning. He's said that for years. When he originally set out the flywheel strategy, that's the way the flywheel works. Once that kinetic energy is going, then you walk away. Then you move on to other pursuits. Then you start pushing harder. Once that flywheel is spinning, Yishputu, it's running, it's on its own, it's passive. You need very little energy to attract the third-party sellers, to increase the customer satisfaction, to increase the bottom line, because it's all happening on its own. That momentum is happening. He can now go on to other, greater, different pursuits. Friends, at the moment, a lot of us are struggling. Especially those with young kids at home. You're struggling with homeschooling your children, things that you thought you would never have to do, and in amongst your own day job, things don't stop just because your kids are now home and they need your help. And you think, will we ever get there? Will we ever master this? Will we ever have any respite? But I want you to know it's like a flywheel. You're pushing, it's a hard push, and you're trying to get that wheel to move. But the more you push, and it's difficult, the struggle, the challenge is right now, that wheel will start to move, will start to gather momentum on its own, will start to pick up steam. And as your children get older, because you're making that effort right now, they're going to move at even greater speed on their own. It's going to be well worth the effort. That effort now is worth every moment of struggle, of challenge, of balancing, of juggling your life, because that wheel will begin to move to the point where they will cut that proverbial umbilical cord and be running in ways that you could never have imagined, because you made that effort now. That effort now is well worth it, because it won't be forever. It will start to move on its own until it's spinning beyond your wildest dreams. And if that's true, friends, for homeschool, I want to give a shout out to home shul, because so many of us right now are unable to be in shul. We're unable to bring our children to shul. We don't have children's programs in shul. And so it's tempting. We get to the end of the week, we've been homeschooling all week, and finally we close those books and we're like, oh, thank God for Shabbos. I never thought I would say thank God for Shabbos like this. I need to breathe a little. But then there's home shul. And there's just that little bit of extra push, where we push to be able to increase and ensure the viability of our children's spirituality, their religious tradition, their commitment to our faith, to our heritage. And it's hard and it's not easy. And all we want to do is go to sleep after dinner tonight. And instead we say, I'm going to give a few words of Torah at the Shabbos table. I'm going to sing a zemer. Shabbos morning, we want to just sleep in, but we say, you know what, I'm just going to get out of bed and go through some of the prayers with my children. That's the effort we need to make with that spiritual flywheel right now. But I promise you, friends, the more you push, the greater the effort you make with that flywheel now, the greater the results you will see as it begins to pick up steam and it begins to turn and turn and turn until it's turning on its own. And you will see that day will come when you will be sitting in shul and your children will walk in with their children, your grandchildren will walk into shul and sit next to you through no effort that you needed to make right then and there on that day. Future you will turn around and thank present you for pushing that flywheel until it turned and automatically your offspring were right there in shul right next to you. It's a lot of effort. It's a huge challenge. It's a huge test. But the Almighty has given us that challenge, and He knows that you're up for it. Push that flywheel, make that extra effort, and may you have everlasting nachas for generations to come. Shabbat Shalom.